All right, good afternoon. And this is kind of like, reminds me of high school, where the one thing you never want to teach is that class right after lunch. Everybody's tired, everybody's stomach's full. But we have a very dynamic conversation we're going to have here with something that I'm very excited about talking about, and that's a new agency that the federal government has just brought up, the Advanced Research Projects Agency Health, ARPA-H. And here to help me with that are two people who are heading ARPA-H, Renee Wegerson. Dr. Renee Wegerson. She is the Director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H, and Dr. Amy Jenkins. She's the Director of Health Science Futures at ARPA-H. Thank you both for being here with us. Let's talk about this agency, because I know something that I had talked about with Francis Collins. He was the Director of the NIH up until recently, and over the last 8 or 9 years, I've talked to him about DARPA, which is the federal agency that the defense uses to come up with these brilliant ideas they come out with after many, many years of research, and how health needed something similar, and he was talking about forming something like that. Finally got around to forming it. The federal government ended up funding it. Renee ended up heading it off here. So Renee, tell us, what exactly is ARPA-H?
So ARPA-H, we were launched about a year ago, and so really the vision of President Biden, there was a lot of people that had the energy to start up an agency that could take those big, audacious bets the way that DARPA did, but to have a place to do that for health. So there's over $1.5 trillion in HHS that's dedicated to health, but there wasn't a little place that you could take these really high-risk, high-payoff shots on goal for health. So ARPA-H is really, we've entered into the ecosystem to be a catalyst for all the health sector. And it's a place that we actually focus very clearly on problems. So it's not a specific disease or a technology, but we want to solve big problems in health. And so we do that in a really unique way where we have a program manager driven agenda moving forward. So I don't set the technical agenda, Amy doesn't, but instead we look to recruit people who are very passionate about solving these big problems in health, and they're demonstrated doers. And so it's that combination of this brilliant person and the problem that they want to solve that we bring together and hire to be at ARPA-H. And so it's really going to be a portfolio of many, many different types of projects in health as we get started.
And for those who don't know DARPA or don't know much about DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, it has been around for a while, and DARPA's claim to fame, essentially, a couple of things. One is it used many decades of funding and many failures to finally get one success, and that success is something that impacts your everyday life, the internet. They actually developed the internet after years of failure and years of incremental changes, which is something that not just our government, most governments are really hard to be able to do that because they're looking for more immediate successes. The other thing they did similarly after many years of failures in funding is they invented GPS. Again, two things, huge things that impact your life. And Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, and that's sort of the slant ARPA-H is looking at, doing these moonshots, essentially.
That's exactly right. So ARPA-H is very much modeled after the DARPA business model. Take those big shots. Think about what might happen if we invest in new scientific and technological advances, maybe things that we can't imagine for the next 20 or 30 years. What happens if we invest in them now? We make a major push in them now so that maybe we can see that realization in the next 5 years. These are very, very audacious goals. Oftentimes, they're likely to fail. We are okay with failure. The program managers that Renee mentioned really need to be a very unique type of person that is very a well-renowned expert in their field, but also not afraid to get up and say, I'm going to take a risk on this thing that I know is going to be very hard. It may fail. Oftentimes, you'll have people in the room when you tell them what you want to do in your program. As a program manager, they'll laugh at you a little bit, and they'll say that's impossible. So you got to have that right personality as a program manager to take that big shot and maybe make those technological advances that we can only imagine.
And when you talk about being okay with failure, you're okay with failure. Renee, I know you're okay with failure as well. How about those that fund you? Are they okay with failure? Because that's what who you ultimately have to answer to.
Right.
And that was one of the beauties of DARPA is they were able, a bear just went by the way, in case anybody's looking out there. So just be careful when you go outside. Ah! There goes the bear.
The cub.
Well, that means Mom was close by.
Yeah, so I think the bear's very interested in advanced research projects and has its own health questions.
Running away, though.
I think he might have a project they want to bring up. But you have to answer to somebody. We all do, especially when it comes to budgeting. Are they going to be okay with these failures year after year after year to get to the successes?
Yeah, so a big part of my job is really setting those expectations, right? So first, we're not going to cure diseases next month. It is, planting those seeds for those big breakthroughs. What is going to be the internet equivalent or GPS or stealth technology that comes out of ARPA-H? So, really early on, when I started in October of last year, meeting with the Congress and not only letting them know, how we're going to approach funding, but letting them know where we had to have authorities so that we could take these big bets and kind of protect ourselves as an agency. And so the strategy that we use when we launch programs, so I want to solve a big program in health. And so we do have one program, and I'll let Amy talk a little bit more in a minute about what it is, but it's around osteoarthritis. So what if your joints could heal themselves? So that's the problem that this program manager wants to take on. And so he announces that problem to the world, and then he's going to put several teams together. And as he brings those teams together, proposals are due today, I think, actually, right? Abstracts. So
thank you for being here.
He'll select multiple teams, and they're each going to have a little bit of a different shot on goal, and that's how you kind of get a portfolio of risk. And on the first day of the program, you might have your full suite of teams and solutions, but on the last day, there'll probably be a down select for those that are most promising. So you hedge your bets to be successful, but even if you don't reach those end goals of the program, in this case, to get it actually into the clinic to helping people, you may really learn a tremendous amount along the way, whether it's about regenerative cell growth and things like this that would be adjacent to the program.
And for both of you, let's myth bust a little bit, because up until a few years ago, I had the concept that I think a lot of people did, the misconception, that it was basically a building full of mad scientists who were just throwing mud at the wall, and eventually internet would stick, GPS would stick. And I envision ARPA-H being a similar thing, but neither one of them is that way, right? You don't have scientists in your building doing this kind of research.
That's right. We have no scientists. We are a funding agency only. People were, I think, somewhat disappointed when they came to DARPA and thought that they were going to
expect
really
seeing
cool
this
stuff.
things
Yeah,
happening.
we had some prototypes in the lobby, but that was about it. So same for ARPA-H. When we are at steady state, we will be a fairly small footprint. I believe our number of full-time employees, government employees, is capped at 210 employees. Where the advances are happening is out in the labs and the companies across this country and across the globe. And so I will say that the idea that we have program managers that are mad scientists, I love to say that we were all Einsteins as program managers. Renee and I were both program managers, so we'll try to take that credit, but that's not the case. These are people that have a vision, but are willing to put together the right teams of people out in the community to solve these big, audacious problems.
And what other myths do people have about ARPA-H? What are the things, and what they had about DARPA, I'm sure it's a similar thing with you guys.
Yeah, I think a few things that we had to myth bust, and still do sometimes, is we're a funding agency, and so our scientists are funders, and so they're not in a lab, so just as Amy said. And so it's also just thinking about, how do we pursue our projects? I think there's a lot of the health ecosystem who tend to, sometimes you're looking for the lowest bidder or the cheapest way to solve a problem, but that's not for us. We're actually looking for realistic projects. We want to really focus on the technical risk, but make sure that our projects are really well resourced, that we bring the right teams to the table, they have the right equipment, and the executional risk is very, very low. And so like if in setting it up in that way, we want to be the transaction at ARPA-H to show that something is possible, and then we are not a forever funder. It has to leave the agency. And that is really why we're disease agnostic, and we're not technology specific, because we want to show that it's possible, and now we've de-risked it. So NIH can pick it up, or BARDA, or the private sector is able to pick it up on the back end.
And right now you're looking at getting satellite offices throughout the country. Why are you doing that? Why not centralize it?
Well, it starts with Congress, and in the first months that I was in office, we actually didn't have authorities to even do the things that we needed to do at ARPA-H. And so I spent a lot of time meeting with members of Congress, letting them know, like, okay, this is where we could be uncompromising. We have to have direct hiring authority. If we want to pick up these mad scientists, and they give us a term appointment of 3 years, we need to be able to hire them really quick, because every 2 weeks that goes by, 1% of their time at ARPA-H is up. So we don't need a drawn-out hiring process. process. We need to be able to have a competitive salaries, so we're not linked to the government scale. We can hire in a competitive way. And so some of the other authorities it gave us were things like prize authority, and then our ability to do contracting. We won't issue grants. We're going to issue contracts, cooperative agreements, and other transactions. So these are all, to those in the jargon, that's like really fast contracting as part of that. So when the authorities came out, I was like, okay, wow, we really laid this great groundwork. And so you're reading the 4,000-page omnibus legislation to just make sure you get everything that you needed. And then I was really surprised to see, and ARPA-H will be in 3 geographies. Three sites, and they capped us at 210 employees. And so that was a really interesting dilemma because 100 of those 210 employees will be program managers. So spread across 3 sites, these really tiny offices. And we said, it doesn't really make sense. I can't find 3 geographies that are going to represent all Americans that we are here to serve. So we decided to lean into a hub and spoke model instead. And we said, because we need to get our programs out the door in, at the end of a program, we need to focus on stakeholders. So making sure folks like FDA, CMS are at the table so that we can have, regulation and payments on the back end. But we need to be close to our customers, our patients, our healthcare providers. So using a hub and spoke network, we might have a hub that's a central location, but they can recruit all 50 states to bring them together and say, okay, if I need to enroll 1,000 patients in this clinical trial and move as fast as I can, I'm going to be able to do that better if I can have consent at scale, if I can recruit at scale. So that's what our customer experience hub is focused on. And then our investor catalyst hub is focused on making sure that we're lining up the right investors, not only on the back end of a program, but even before we launch a program, so that we understand not only do I need to buy down this technical risk, but if I want the private sector to commercialize this, these are the market risks that we need to address. And so that is an active competition right now. We're in phase 3, so we've done our site selection visits already, and we'll be announcing that before this fall, where those hub and spoke.
Aspen would be a great place. Do you have a bear out there that can help you? So Amy, and we've talked about this a few times recently. What does it mean when you say that you're trying to invent the future?
In the Health Science Futures Office, we are trying to focus on scientific and technological barriers, new advances in science and technology that are going to fundamentally change how we either practice medicine, how we diagnose disease in the future. The one thing that I want to make very clear is that many of the things we do, particularly in the Health Science Futures Office, may be things like new optics, new, very, very small, like physics-based approaches that you may never see, you may never know. And one thing that I keep saying, and frankly thinking to myself, is that some of the things we invent in this office may go into diagnostic devices that my grandchildren are using and that are helping early diagnosis of cancer or disease. And you don't know it's there, right? You don't know. You just know you have this cool machine and this does this thing. And it turns out that there was this very fundamental advance that happened to make that machine possible. And so those are the types of things that we envision doing in this office.
And one of the other things we talk about, and along the same lines, is having what you call the successful failure. Mm-hmm. The words sound great together, but what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, if you're aiming for a very risky goal, and so say you want to change the time that it takes to discover a therapeutic from 4 years down to 4 days. These are the types of goals we set for ourselves typically. So orders of magnitude change, that's very, very hard to do. And we recognize that you might not hit that goal. You might miss that goal by 75%. You might learn a lot along the way, learn a lot about foundational science, basic science. But what you might do is now develop a platform approach for identifying a therapeutic in 4 months, down from 4 years. Still radical change. It was a failure by our standards, but it's still radical change and could fundamentally change the medical landscape.
And kind of what we talked about, the equivalent of Edison when he was inventing a light bulb, the legend is, might be a myth, but the legend was that he took 1,000 attempts to invent it, and some reporter said, you failed 999 times, and he said, no, I learned how not to do it 999 times.
Well, what I'll add there is what's really interesting in the model for ARPA-H is that our program managers can only be here for a term appointment. So they have 3 years, followed by the possibility for up to an additional 3 years, so that's 6 years. What that does to an organization like us is that we have no institutional memory. So what this organization looks like today, it'll be completely different in 7 years. I won't be here. Renee likely won't be here. We'll be gone. Most of the program managers will be gone, or there'll be new program managers. And so as technological advances and those lessons are learned over the next decade, we may get a program manager that comes in 10 years from now and says, I'm going to try this thing. Maybe it was tried 10 years ago and it failed. In an organization where everybody stays the same, they're like, no, you can't do that. That failed 10 years ago. Why would you redo what so-and-so did 10 years ago? And you say, so-and-so wasn't here, nobody else was. It gives us the chance to really think about these new technologies and how can we really push this without being scared of what failed in the past.
So to a certain extent, you do want to reinvent the wheel, just try and reinvent it better.
Based on everything.
Bigger, faster.
We rely on something that we call enabling technologies. As the program managers that work in my office, they bring us the crazy ideas. We're not doing science fiction. I mean, I need real science, and so we ask them, what are the enabling technologies? Why do you think this is possible today when it wasn't possible 10 years ago? It doesn't have to be the first full solution, but it needs to be, at least give me some idea based in scientific reality that this is a possibility.
But there's actually a real concrete example that started at DARPA in this way. So, a million years ago when I started first at DARPA, there was a program that was 24-hour biodefense. Where you can detect a threat and have a therapeutic against it in 24 hours. The program failed, but there were some fundamental advances. The next program, when another program manager came in, this was Michael Callahan, it had 7-day biodefense. And then that failed. And then there was another program, Adept Protect, which was, okay, what about mRNA encoding things? And then and that was successful. It showed some proof of concept. And then that program manager and Amy and Matt Hepburn launched P3, which is 60 days, right? So it's those enabling technologies and the kind of realizing like where are you at, what is actually a possibility, and then now that actually does work.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that the 60 days worked. We were able to get into the clinic during COVID-19 in 90 days, so we just about hit it.
One of the things is inventing different things out there that work, especially in the medical field. The other side of that coin, and this is from my own engineering background, is sometimes engineers and scientists will invent something that the end user either doesn't need, doesn't want, or won't use for specific reasons. How do you guard against that?
So we build it into the program. So when you're at ARPA-H as a program manager, your job pitch, when you're applying, you send in your CV, and then you send in your idea in the framework of what's called the Heilmeyer questions. And so these are, we stole 8 questions directly from DARPA. George Heilmeyer was an early director there, and those questions are, what are you trying to do? Don't use any jargon, but explain clearly. How's it done today? And then what's new in your approach? What's the game-changing difference? What are the risks? How long will it take? How much will it cost? And then what are those milestones? How to get that across the line? At ARPA-H, we've added 2 additional questions, and one of those is around cost, accessibility, but then user experience. How are we creating tools and technologies that the public wants to enthusiastically adopt? And so when I talked about that hub and spoke model, having this customer experience hub that can reach out to all the states, that's how we intend to use it, to enroll for clinical trials, to push prototypes out into that ecosystem, and importantly, have a data commons on top of that we're collecting the data all the time. And it's bi-directional. As we invent new technologies, we can push that out into the ecosystem, and as we learn things, we can pull that data back in.
And when President Biden announced this ARPA-H and he announced your appointment, one of the things he did say is it might require unusual partnerships. What does he mean by that? Because you had talked about investors early, and usually when you think about government entities, government agencies, they don't usually have private investors. But what are we talking about here with unusual partnerships?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts about an ARPA is the way that an ARPA can do public-private partnerships to make those partnerships just so easy through contracting, and bringing in non-traditional partners. Or for an end-to-end solution, you might first start with a university partner and then end with a commercialization partner. Or to get to the customer experience, maybe we need to work with a K-12 school as part of this. Like, we don't know, but we're open to those relationships and to be really, really creative in how we approach that. And we're looking for program managers that aren't afraid to be able to go into that domain. And so Amy mentioned, maybe we have fundamental progress in physics or another domain, and that's where I think we're going to bring in those unusual solutions. I'll give you one example that really excites me around data sharing. So in the Department of Defense, where I was before, Army, Navy, Air Force share data seamlessly in classified environments so you don't lose milliseconds for targeting missiles. I can't get my kids data record in a pediatric office to the hospital without 20 forms and 18 phone calls.
And that's one thing we found out during the pandemic is the information, the data was out there. It was really hard to collect it.
That's right. And so I'm like the solution is out there. We've done it. We do it every day. And so how do we bring in some of those maybe non-traditional thinkers who come from other domains to start to apply some of those solutions in the health space?
And is this ARPA-Net? Is that what we're talking about? Or?
So the ARPA-Net is a little different. That's this hub and spoke network that we're trying to create. So we had a conversation yesterday about, early days at DARPA that launched the internet and started with like 4 nodes on the back of a napkin of like, here's this communications network that we're going to pull together. And so we really think that we need to lay this foundation for an ARPA-Net for health, that we can stay connected, that we can kind of share this information, and we're going to try to do that through the hub and spoke.
And that includes sharing the ideas, so that way, if somebody had brought something up or invented something, somebody else could use that, piggyback on that to invent something else. Is that?
That's part of it, but it's also really listening to the community, understanding where the gaps are, what are the problems. There's a tremendous gap from innovation in the lab to getting this that final delivery to the end user, and so we need to do a better job closing that gap.
And I know the first project you started off with is Nitro, which is the osteoarthritis project here. Number one, why did you pick that one? And number two, what's the goal? What's the hope behind that?
Yeah, so I didn't pick it. Renee didn't pick it. We had one of our first program managers, Dr. Ross Urich. He joined the agency very early on. He has a background. He's a surgeon. He's done lots of surgeries and replaced joints and arthritic joints. And he said to us, I could do this for the rest of my career. I could be a surgeon. I could replace joints. Or I could come here for 6 years and maybe completely eliminate the need for new joints ever. I really want to make a major impact and a major change like that. And so he came in as an expert that understood that gap, and spent the first 3 months of his time here at ARPA-H researching, talking to experts in the field, both academic, commercial, government, many experts at the NIH on osteoarthritis, making sure that he had all the inputs across the government and across the entire ecosystem, and then put together a program that aims to reverse osteoarthritis using minimally invasive or non-invasive or needle-based injections into a joint or into an IV injection that would reverse osteoarthritis at the first sign of osteoarthritis. Reverse it. Full reversal of osteoarthritis. And so what I have learned, I'm not an expert in osteoarthritis, but oftentimes when people present at a doctor, they present because they have pain, and they've already have osteoarthritis. They already have some degradation of either the bone or the cartilage or both. And so in order to really solve that problem and bring that person back to having a joint that they had that has no osteoarthritis, you actually have to regenerate both that bone and that cartilage so that they can work together in perfect synergy in that joint. And so we want to restore those joints back to what they were if they had no osteoarthritis.
If you talk to some people, you would think this is very pie in the sky. This is not doable. But that's what ARPA-H does. They look at it and they say, we do believe it is doable. And in what time period are we thinking?
Yeah, so we do believe it's doable. We recognize it's going to be very, very hard. The timeline for the program is 5 years. We don't suspect that the solution will be out in 5 years. We're looking to run phase 1 clinical trials within 5 years, but we do think in 10 years, if we're successful, there may be an opportunity to go into the doctor and get an injection in your knee that solves the osteoarthritis problem. One way we solve this problem is to say, we don't just go out and just hope for the best on these very hard, very audacious goals. We actually, one way, and I think one of the magic sauces of an ARPA, is that we ask people to come into the performer community. We call them performers, not grantees, because we don't issue grants, into the performer community and to find teams. We don't think that any one person or any one lab or any one company can solve this problem. It may take a variety of individuals. It will take people that have clinical backgrounds. It'll take protein chemists. It will take people that understand some of the cellular and biological pathways. May take some engineers, most likely will take engineers, to come in and all work together to solve this problem. And we hold proposers days. We just held it last week in Minneapolis to bring all these people together. We had over 200 people there so that they can come and talk to each other. And one person may say, I'm really good at making this protein therapeutic, but I have no idea how to regenerate bone. Does anybody out there know how to regenerate bone? And so then they start talking to each other and they come together to form these big teams.
So that's the beauty behind it, is getting that collaboration, getting those brains. Like you mentioned, there'd be some expert in one field, some expert in another field. Putting those together really advances and pushes us forward.
That's exactly it. That's the mad scientist. That's what we do really well as mad scientists, is bring a bunch of other mad scientists together.
I'm kind of 2033. All right. If you could do it earlier, I'd appreciate that. And Renee, how do you balance the short-term successes and failures versus the long-term successes and failures? Because like I mentioned, especially those who fund you, the population, the public, they always look for those short-term successes and advances. And how do you balance that off?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, for an ARPA, our timelines tend to be longer, more like 10, 15 years. But I feel, a lot of urgency as the first director to prove, hey, this is what we're capable of in short timelines. And so I think first launching Nitro is just a great example. That the program that Amy just outlined, there's no other place for that. And so that's a big win for us early on. So it's already showing, okay, when you create these autonomies for an agency like this, you can get really big new ideas. So those are going to be some of our successes. I've told Congress that sometimes success is going to look like failure for us. So if we launch 10 programs this year, if 2 of those fails, that has to be okay, and there needs to be space for that. And then we do have prize authority, and so that's kind of going to be, I think, those tend to be shorter term, shots on goal to demonstrate a proof of concept. Maybe it's not bringing something to the clinic, but it could be a fundamental advancement in the state of the art. So we're trying to balance, again, the different approaches even that we move forward.
And is ARPA-H in a bubble here, just working in the U.S.? Does it work internationally as well? Because a lot of smart people in the U.S., a lot of smart people in other parts of the world too, who might have an idea that we don't even know about.
We're open globally. So, obviously the president launched this initiative to serve all Americans, but of course health doesn't, honor any borders. So we will look for advancements from all over the globe.
So how does somebody come to you with an idea? How do they do that? Because there are a lot of people out there with ideas, and they might not know how to approach ARPA-H and say, hey, this is an idea. If I could get some help, I think we can do this. And like you mentioned, it's going to be, you only look at things, or you look at everything, but you only will go with things that at least have some feasibility of being successful.
That's right. We have a couple different ways that people can bring us their ideas. So at Steady State, the bulk of the way we will fund and work with people in the community is through these programs like Nitro, what we call program-specific BAAs. But we're an ideas organization. We don't want to miss ideas just because we don't have those specific program-specific call for proposals out on the street right now. So we have something called an open broad agency announcement. It's on our website, and you're going to be able to see a QR code for that later. And in that open broad agency announcement, you read it and you're like, wow, anything could go in here. It's meant to be very broad. And this is a place for people that have great, audacious, revolutionary ideas. Incremental ideas need not apply. That's not what we're looking for here. But people that have great revolutionary ideas to submit them to us. We have a very low barrier to entry, just 3 pages, little abstract. We will review and provide you formal feedback on that. But that's a way to bring ideas to us.
And then from there, you answer their questions. You basically bring them in or say, not yet.
Yeah, we say, in some cases we may say, no, this isn't quite appropriate for our agency. A lot of people are still learning what it means to work with ARPA-H, and so they may bring us ideas that are just not quite the right fit for the agency. We will provide that feedback, and in some cases it'll be a great fit, and we'll say, wow, this is a revolutionary idea. We really like this, let's send us a full proposal.
And Renee, one of the controversies early on when they first formed ARPA-H is where it was going to sit under whose umbrella. If you look at DARPA, they're under the Department of Defense. They're not under the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, any agency. They're under the Department of Defense. If you look at ARPA-E, which is ARPA for energy, it's under the DoD. It's not under any of the laboratories or anything. When ARPA-H was first being announced and where it was going to fit, there was that controversy between should it be under HHS or should it go under NIH? And there's back and forth as to which would be better, which would be more helpful, and which would be more detrimental. What's your thought on the fact that it was put under NIH, and should it be there or should it be under HHS?
Yeah, so we actually have one foot in both organizations, so it's a little bit of a hybrid model. We are stood up within NIH. However, we are not an institute. There's 27 institutes at NIH. We are not an institute. We're an agency. But I report directly to the Secretary of HHS. And so this gives us autonomy in decision making. We have a separate budget from NIH, but because we are launched within NIH, that helped us right from day one. We had people to do payroll. We didn't have to set up that piece of our business operation. So it actually really helped us on the business operations side to just get moving quickly. But then we also are very close to all of our the other institute directors and the scientists that are close by. And we're exempt, however, from some of their policies. So at NIH, because they are a grant-making organization, there's study sections and a lot of collaborative decision making. At ARPA-H, we don't use study sections. The program manager is a single decision maker. And so the way that we make those decisions, and in the case of a program manager, they'll design a program, and then that's their job pitch. Then they come in-house and they kind of refine it a little bit. The mission office director, like Amy is, will kind of give them a yes, you can bring that to the director, and then we'll review that. And then if I say yes, it goes back to the program manager with a budget. And then that program manager is the decision maker on that program. They put the teams together and they do everything. Kind of they're like the CEO of the program and what's going to happen. And that is very different from the model like NIH. And so our authorities, and because I report to a different infrastructure, allows us to do that.
So it was able to be under NIH, but get away from some of the concerns people had earlier that you'd be reporting to NIH, who would report to HS, who would report, essentially having those layers. You're able to work around that.
That's right.
I gotta be honest with you, when you guys are talking about this, it sounds like a scientist's dream to be in a situation like this where you have people coming to you with these ideas that nobody else would fund, nobody else would look at, and you can look at it and go, let's try that. Let's see what happens. And do you try things initially, or do you try things saying, okay, this is gonna be a 10-year commitment, or let's see what happens over the next couple of years, or both?
I think we do both. I mean, I will say that the program manager position in an ARPA is probably the best job in the government. We're maybe a bit biased because we were both program managers. And so it is the opportunity to change your field. It's also the opportunity to develop an entirely new ecosystem. And so we have lots of folks that come in from academia, and they may say, well, why would I do this? Why bother coming to an ARPA and taking potentially 3 or 6 years off of my current job? And the idea is that you can fundamentally transform your entire system. We often have a lot of program managers that come in that are frustrated. They're very frustrated, and they said, I've spent my whole career watching these problems. There's no way to solve it right now. This may be a way to solve it. And so we do take those very quick shots, but oftentimes you build an ecosystem that grows fruit for many decades to come.
And you were both at DARPA. Do you have any examples of things that came to you, ideas that people were like, I don't know about that, but it turned out to be just a great idea?
One of them, really, I talked about it in the big idea kind of kickoff this week, but how do you reversibly and temporarily, alter your genetic makeup? And so I love that idea of just thinking there's some diseases, that you want to be curative and you may, correct a gene, but there's some things that will be, shorter periods of time, like we talked about menopause, or something that you don't want to have lifelong, or even protection from infectious disease. So SARS-CoV-2 enters your body through the ACE2 receptor. What if you just silence that receptor while you're at risk, right? So these are just kind of this different way of thinking. And so it was literally a brainstorming session with a performer that we had working on another program, and we're like, is that crazy? We were talking about flu at the time. And then he's like, I don't know, maybe a little bit crazy. And I'm like, well, you're not laughing at me. And I was like, okay, what if we just a little shot on goal? So we would call this a seedling effort, where literal back of a napkin, coffee time conversation, and just say, okay, if we can show these two things in the next 8 months, I think there's a there. And so we did it, and we were able to show it. He was like, holy cow, I can't believe this works. And then we launched a program called Prepare. And the idea there was to use gene modulation to protect against radiological, chemical, and biological threats. And so that's using a single platform technology for gene modulation to do that diversity of different things. And we wanted it to be a platform across all of those threats, because if we're successful, then our friends and family at FDA would have to look at a platform solution, right? It's not going to be a single indication. So we don't make policy or regulation, but we wanted to be able to create that kind of pressure on the system through our technology innovation to, again, accelerate that forward. But we're not allowed to have favorites, so that was maybe my favorite program.
In my time there, I was obsessed with speed. Working in the DoD, knowing that we deployed military personnel around the globe and often put them in harm's way from particularly infectious disease threats, I was obsessed with how can we find countermeasures quicker, how can we find vaccines quicker, and how can we manufacture them faster. And a lot of the things that we did in the early days in my first years at DARPA, before I was even a program manager, ended up being fed into Operation Warp Speed. We're very proud of that. And we also launched some initiatives initiatives to have small-scale manufacturing. So this was one of the first things I did as a program manager, was launch a program to say, okay, RNA vaccines, we've shown the promise of them. They're very fast. They could potentially be even faster. And so could we think about ways to be able to manufacture them wherever we need them very quickly? So rather than taking 2 months, which is a record pace, could we do it in 2 days? And so that's the initiatives that we launched at DARPA. And I will follow on that I left that program and I handed it off to another program manager. So it was a 5-year program. I wasn't there for 5 years. And so I had to hand my baby off to another program manager that takes another hard look at it and says, okay, well, maybe we need to do things a little differently here. That's part of the model. And that program that Renee mentioned, she actually handed that to me when she left from DARPA, and I had a new eye on it and changed a couple things. And that's a really important part of the model, because I feel like you don't invent the future, you're not innovative if you have the same people with the same ideas all the time. So it's constantly taking another look at these ideas.
And we've all run against that wall at some time or another in our careers, where you're talking to that one person, you have a great idea for whatever company you happen to be in, whatever specialty or field you happen to be in, and it's somebody who's been in that field for 30 years, and they're doing it the same way they did it 30 years ago, and they don't want to move from that model because that's what they always do. So they're not really willing to hear this new approaches. So at ARPA-H, which is modeled after the DARPA approach, that's what you're talking about. It's kind of fresh eyes on it, new blood, looking at it from a different angle, going, hey, you brought it this far, that's great, but I think if we just tweak it a little bit this way, it could be better.
And we're also not afraid to break a rule of science.
Yeah, absolutely.
try to think about how we might do that. But.
I mean, I think you hit that nail on the head. Like, that's why the president wanted us to be here. So, like, to bring different minds together, looking at some of the same problems, the same diseases differently, and then giving that back to the ecosystem once we can kind of just like change course, right? Trying to change course of an aircraft carrier is hard, and so you need to have new eyes on it and just have a fresh approach.
And then how does ARPA-H look at the equity approach to healthcare and where we're heading right now? Because one thing the pandemic has taught us, and we've heard that over and over again this last 3 days, is equity is a huge issue, especially in healthcare. How does ARPA-H deal with that?
Well, part of it, I mentioned those Heilmeyer questions earlier. So addressing cost, accessibility, and user experience are really, really key to that. So we won't give a program manager a budget, a bank account, until they address those. And like Ross had this example. So when he brought the program forward, we're like, okay, great. How are you going to enroll a diverse clinical trial for osteoarthritis that's reflective of the population that has that disease? And he's like, that's really hard. And I'm like, you need that as a metric in your program, because yeah, it's really hard, but if we're successful, that's gonna really accelerate the state of the art. So now it's up to the performer community that's going to be proposing to this program to figure out new ways to be able to do that. So we're building it in, and we want to kind of experiment on new ways to do it. The other thing I'll say, we talked about immersion experiences for our program managers. We want this to be a great place to work and to level up and get closer to your customers. And at DARPA, the way they did this is, I've never been enlisted military. I was a civilian DoD employee, but I could spend a day with the Navy SEALs, or I could spend a day in an F-16 we talked about yesterday. And then it is. Yeah. And think about, wow, I got really sick on that ride. And so what are things I could do for pilots going forward? But if you don't have that experience, you don't bring that lens to your programs. And so what is that like for ARPA-H? And that's a really important part for us, for this Hub and Spoke network. So what's it like to build a healthy building that kids are going to be in? What are the struggles now, and what are the gaps that we need to address? Or what's the best in autonomous surgery right now? Why do I only have to be able to go to these centers of excellence to get surgery? What if I live in rural somewhere? I want to be able to have the same surgery. And so how do we do that autonomously, for example? So we want to bring that lens for PMs.
We're going to open up for questions in a couple minutes, but for both of you, 20, 30 years from now, when you look back at 2023 and ARPA-H, what are you hoping you see over the last 20 years?
I mean, I think it's possible 20, 30 years from now that, like I said before, that many of the healthcare tools that we'll be using, or some of the healthcare tools that we'll be using, have come out of fundamental and foundational advances at ARPA-H. And then I would hope that 20 or 30 years from now, we are further towards our goal of curing diseases.
right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're going to be able to look back and really point to some diseases that we can be curative, that we can advance the state of the art. I think for me personally, what drove me to come to this position too was to make sure that the first director of this organization gets to set the DNA. And I'm like, Amy, everything else is just messenger after that, right? Like you got to set the DNA right. The culture, allowing innovation in, and that will pay dividends. Well, if we got it right, if Amy and the rest of the leadership team, if we got it right, we'll know that in 10 or 20 years from now, because we'll still be here, we'll have a growing budget, and then we're going to have a broad portfolio of programs that have been transitioned into the real world. Because we're here for those short periods of time, success for us is that things made it into the real world, and then we should have a list at that point of, ARPA-H contributed to this.
Well, excellent. And I know we have a slide that has some information on it, so I don't know if you're able to pull the slide up. We'll be with you in a minute, sir.
Should have a QR
Yeah, there's a
code.
slide, so you guys want to
Okay.
talk through this?
QR code links to our website. So it's ARPA-H.gov. It's easier to go to the QR code. And you can learn some information there about that open BAA that I talked about, and also how to become a program manager if you're interested in taking this wild ride at ARPA-H.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and open it up for questions over here. If we have a microphone, if we could get this gentleman over here. And I do have to ask, just because I've always thought, the last 2 years, why ARPA-H and not HARPA?
Well, this was really being discussed deeply in the prior administration, so it's absolutely nonpartisan. So it was HARPA in the last administration, and so of course it would change dramatically in this administration
Right,
and
there you go.
became ARPA-H.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francis Najafi from Phoenix. We are, as you can hear all over, an age of AI, and it's all about data analytics and predictive analytics. And yet, just around the corner from you at NHI, U.S. Genome Project was created to essentially provide, the whole human genome. So why would our country, say at your particular institute, would not attempt to gene sequence every American and create that massive data available? That would be the fastest way to address every disease if you have a gene sequence of every American available for research and development and potentially preventing future disease.
So again, I'll really emphasize that we don't set the technical agenda, and if that is your big idea, right? It's not it's your goal is maybe to sequence every American in your case, but what are the tools? What needs to be true for you to be able to get there in 5 years? What's the technology innovation? What's the data innovation that you need to have? How are you going to enroll more than 300 million people in a study? So those are the types of questions that program managers come to address. And maybe 5 years from now, maybe you're not successful, but if you sequence 150 million Americans, that's pretty good, right? And I do think that is something that, we have a very biased data set right now when it comes to healthcare in this country, but we have a tidal wave of AI technology coming. And so we really feel this urgency to make sure that we're keeping up in collecting data that really is representative of all Americans. And we have a tremendous team. Dr. Jen Roberts, who runs our Resilient Systems Office, is a data expert and is really creatively thinking about, when you stand up a new agency, you also get to stand up new data structures and ways that we're going to help do this in an automated way to help our program managers and our performers, kind of reach some of those goals that you talked about. Yeah.
Let me get somebody over here. Ma'am?
Hi, I'm Laura Lauder here in Aspen. My question is about off-label use of existing drugs that have been approved. The big problem for those is paying for the clinical trials, and there are so many that are very close to being shown as curative. And I'm curious if that is something that you will perhaps highlight or encourage teams to bring to you.
I can take a first shot.
Yeah.
We're an agency that's really focused on risk, and very often when a technology or a drug is de-risked to the point of being deep into a clinical trial, it's not really for us to fund. But where I think we could be very creative, as you said, there's so much money sunk into this, but the way that we design clinical trials now is kind of like one drug, one trial. It's very isolated, it's a very old system. And so what is the innovation in the way that we approach clinical trials to do this in an accelerated way? How do we look at some of that drug repurposing or off-label use? Those are the creative solutions that we want to be able to push on, show that it's possible in maybe 3-4 year period, and then hope that that becomes the norm going forward.
Sure. This gentleman right here.
They're racing to get to you.
Thank you. I have 3 questions that I think will have quick answers. Did Congress give you a charter that required that the investments that you are making cover a spectrum of certain areas? Second, do you partner with other people? And third, what's the investment amounts that you can put in?
So first, not a single one of our dollars is linked to a specific disease or to a specific technology. So no, we have full freedom to operate, and that's something I'll fiercely protect. And so we have over $1.7 trillion in HHS that is dedicated often to specific diseases. So we want to have that flexibility. The second question you asked is about partnering. Absolutely. So as Amy mentioned, a lot of those solutions are going to require a lot of different players to come together and team. And there's different ways you can potentially sometimes do a cost share where somebody might go halvesies with the government. Or for transition on the back end, we might be able to show that something is possible, and now we've de-risked it enough for somebody to pick it up and fund on the back end. Inside of government, we absolutely have partnerships as well. So in the example of the osteoarthritis program, we worked really closely with NIH and the experts in osteoarthritis to make sure we're not being redundant, and that if we're successful, we're also going to accelerate their programs along the way. And so that's a way that we have kind of those stakeholders and partners. And then you asked about the size of funding of projects for us. So our initial appropriation is $2.5 billion. And we actually invite our program managers when they launch their programs, they have to define a budget for us. Like, what's it going to take to make this real? On average, most programs end up being between $50 and $150 million. 3 to 5 teams over time, if that kind of gives you an idea. But there's no prescription of how much each project is going to cost. But I hope that's kind of painted a picture. These aren't $50,000 projects. Like these are well resourced that we can really advance the state of the art.
Okay. This gentleman right here. I'll get some in the back of the room, I promise.
Sure. Arthur Evans, American Psychological Association. In listening to you, it sounded like a lot of the interventions, a lot of the things that you were interested in were clinical interventions. Before I did what I do now, I was a commissioner, and I funded lots of programs. I spent millions of dollars every day, taxpayer money, and I always wanted to have more research and science to help guide the decisions that I was making. So a lot of those decisions are outside of the clinical intervention. They are how you design systems, it's the workforce, who can do what. Are you going to be able to look at and answer those kinds of questions, those things that are beyond the interventions that people are using?
Go ahead. Absolutely. The answer is 100% yes. Frankly, we have 2 offices. We haven't talked about our specific offices too much besides Health Science Futures that I lead, but we have another office called the Proactive Health Office. In this office, the goal of the office and the goal of the types of things that we'll fund in that office are to prevent people from becoming patients in the first place. And so many of these things may be focused around behavioral health, new healthy buildings, things that aren't necessarily in the clinical realm or in the therapeutic intervention realm. Absolutely. We also have the Resilient Systems Office that Renee mentioned that Dr. Jen Roberts runs within the agency right now. And here we're building entire systems, and they may be outside, they may be clinical trial based, or they may be entirely outside of that ecosystem. So the answer is yes.
Great. Ma'am, back here? Yes. They're going to bring a mic. We're being webcast, so that way the mic can capture you.
Hi, thank you for everything that you're doing. I'm Kathy. I'm in communications in healthcare. 2 very quick questions. Number 1, how do you determine what gets the green light and what doesn't? And then also, what is the sheer volume of ideas that come through your door?
So the question on the green light, there's two answers to that. The first is the internal. How do you determine that a program is going to move forward? And I think Renee touched on that. It's both the office director and then the agency director says, yes, this is a program we want to pursue in consultation with making sure that we're not being redundant. When we receive those proposals, as was mentioned earlier, we do not have study sections. The program managers do employ and have an entire group of, not employ, they don't pay for them, but have an entire group of government reviewers that help review the proposals. And there are strict criteria by which those proposals are reviewed. It's outlined in our broad agency announcement or our calls for proposals. But I will talk about one of those criteria. The first criteria and the most important criteria is scientific and technical merit. We are evaluating proposals based on the scientific and technical approach that's being taken and whether or not the risks that are inherent in the very risky type of research that we do, whether or not there are ways to mitigate that risk. We know that you're not going to completely buy down that risk. We want to make sure that there's maybe multiple approaches or there's a way to ensure that we're not just taking the one shot, the very, very risky shot. The other thing we do evaluate is the performer, the team. Are they capable of doing this? Or, they might say that they've got this great technological approach. Can they actually do it? So that's really how we evaluate these proposals, and then the program manager makes the final decision on the green light. And I have to admit, I already forgot the second question. Oh, the volume. So we have an open broad agency announcement right now. I will say that to date, we've received almost 300 abstracts. We do try to review those as quickly as possible and get responses back to the people that have submitted. That open broad agency announcement's been open since March 15th. So in just over 3 months, we got 300 submissions, and we anticipate to stay at that pace.
Maybe I'll add one point there is because of the volume, we've also done 3-pagers. So we don't want you to spend a lot of time writing an application that you'll be disappointed if we say no. So it's a 3 pages, kind of like a low barrier to entry. We want to hear your idea, and then we can take that next step for a more in-depth solution if we're excited about it.
Sir?
Hi, I'm Erwin Tan from AARP. I'm a geriatrician, so I don't believe aging is a disease, but there is a lot of promise in geroscience, which would be to affect the biological rate of aging. But the question is, how do we actually prove it if there are interventions? Is that within your purview?
Absolutely, and again, I would say reversing osteoarthritis is probably a good first step. But longevity generally is absolutely of interest. And again, just want to kind of point you to OpenBA as a way to submit ideas there, but also program managers that are passionate about this, that want to come on board and really start to advance the state of the art on that is how we proceed.
Excellent. Thank you guys very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, but can we put the slide back up real quick? Can we put the slide back up real quick? Do we have the ability to do that? Just in case anybody wants to take pictures of it there. And the bear was actually taking a picture, and I think went off to submit a proposal, so the bear's cleared, so we're good to be out there. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Appreciate it.